Okay, good morning, everybody. We are here for performance monitoring training because that's too long of a title. So welcome. I would like to welcome everybody here. It's nice to see some friendly faces here, as well as everybody who is on the webinar. So welcome. This is why I'm sure everybody's here. You want to know about your credits that you're going to be getting. We submitted for 2 credits for the LSRPs, the 1 regulatory and 1 technical credit. To get these credits, you have to remember to sign in up outside. If you have not signed in yet, please go out and sign in because it's very important. And remember to sign out at the end of the training. In addition, for the webinar participants, you have to be logged in the entire session, and there will be 4 quizzes that will come up. They will look like this. At that point, I will interrupt the speaker who is giving the presentation. You will get a question. I will read the question for everybody. I will read the possible answers, and then after 60 seconds, we will move on from that. Regarding the CECs, the process is we will take the information from the webinar attendance list as well as the attendance list outside. We will submit it to the LSRPA. If you want your certificate, there is a $25 processing fee. I recommend to everybody when you get your certificate, make copies, save it someplace nice, safe, and secure because you will need to present that certificate to the board so that you can sit for the exams and for your recertification. We have big news, everybody. The case study training is going to be changed. We are working on the changes right now. I hope everybody comes and sees that training at Rutgers. It will be in June. Last important reminders, your cell phones. Please put them on mute. And if you have to take a call, please go outside to do so. In addition, we will be having questions after most of the presenters. Please wait for the people here in the audience. Please wait until we hand you a microphone so that everybody on the webinar can hear your question. When we ask you the question, when we hand you the microphone, please introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are. At the end of remember to fill out your evaluation form at the end, and remember again to sign in and out so you get your credit. At this point, I'm going to be handing off for the LSRPA. There you go. Slide.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right.
Morning, everyone. I'm here to provide some information on the LSRPA. I've been in the organization since, 08, 09 timeframe, and obviously any LSRPs in the room who are not part of the organization, I recommend you sign up. You get a lot of good information, access to colleagues. It's a collegial group, so I highly recommend joining if you're not already a member. First thing we'd like to do is thank our sponsors. We have diamond, platinum, gold, and silver sponsors. Without them, we could not do the business we do. They help fund our events, our training courses, beverages, refreshments, etc. So big thanks to all of them. That's gold and silver. Okay, continuing ed requirements. This is old hat for most of you, so I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. 36 credits required over a 3-year license renewal period, 3 of which will be ethics, which I'll be talking about in a couple minutes. 10 regulatory, 14 technical, 9 discretionary in the above categories. The LSRPA, along with some other organizations, offer ethics courses. The LSRPA, we try to at least offer them 6 times during each 3-year period, twice a year, usually spring and fall. Try to distribute them geographically throughout the state, a couple in North, Central, South Jersey throughout the year. We do have the longest continuous running ethics course for the program. Next course we'll be hosting will be January 23rd, 2018 at our New Jersey Site Remediation Conference. This is a new thing for us, which we'll talk about in another minute. It's in New Brunswick, the New Brunswick Hyatt. It'll be on the first day before we have our annual and business meetings. We're then going to have it, I believe the exam is either September or October next year, so we're going to have it before then. So. This little helpful reminder from Sue Boyle. She slipped this info in. Be very careful when you're tracking your CECs. Timing is an issue. I know there's a couple of cases in front of the board of folks kind of waiting to the last minute to get their continuing ed credits. Get them beforehand. It's not that hard if you space them out throughout the year. Remember, your application's due 90 days before your expiration on your license. Your continuing ed credits have to be completed at the time of your application, not the time of your license expires. There are several online options that are approved by the board for the technical and regulatory. Ethics, you kind of have to go there and go to one of the providers and take the class. Okay, upcoming events. We have a couple of breakfasts coming up and a class in November. Blue Swan Diner, November 21, November 28th. We've got off-site practical implementation training in Florida Park. There's another breakfast at Ponzio's Cherry Hill, December 19th. And then January 23rd, we have the start of our two-day conference. You can go to our website, lsrpa.org, to register for any of these events. As Sana tells me, it's probably better to be a member so you can actually drill down into the website and get what you need. Not that it's a paywall, but there are some restrictions on access if you're not a member. So the Site Remediation Conference, which is coming up mid-January, that is our first shot at a two-day event. The first day there's going to be ethics, I think 3 training classes. We've got 3 rooms. There's 26 credits available that are non-ethics, 15 technical, 11 regulatory. I mean, each person attending, since there's 3 classes, you can probably only get about 12 plus your ethics. But still, if you're running out of time and you need to grab a bunch of credits in one shot, that's a good way to do it. You can get member discount rooms at the Hyatt. Again, go through the website for details, but the Hyatt's already half booked on the reserved rooms. So we've got about 70 people today who are already signed up. So if you want to attend, which would be good, go ahead and sign up at the website. Member breakfast I covered. There's a historic fill white paper now out on the website. I think it's under the risk management committee tab. There's a course listing under the continuing education tab. You'll see a committee tab at the top of the website once you log in, and from there you can drill down, and there's all sorts of good information on the website. A lot of content. Definitely recommend it. A couple of initiatives. You folks may have heard this before, so I'll go through them very quickly. There's a continuing ed spreadsheet tracking tool on the website. You can track classes as you go, download it, save it locally, whatever. We also have 2 interesting initiatives at the LSRPA over the past year or 2. One is dispute resolution. A couple dozen LSRPs are listed. So if there's disputes between LSRPs, you don't want to go the attorney route. You can try and work it out with a third-party LSRP. Sounding board's kind of near and dear to my heart. Essentially, it's a confidential sounding board where you email, or submit a question on a form from the website. The form gets emailed to about a half a dozen of our top members, or most experienced members. They'll bat the question around for a couple of days, come to a consensus. One of the committee members will call the inquiring party back, give them a verbal opinion on whatever their issue is. And try and stay out of the legal world, but any sort of technical or administrative type of issue they can handle and help you out with. It was intended to help out the smaller shops that maybe don't have a lot of LSRPs in-house that can, as you know, banter issues back and forth. It's non-binding. It's really not meant to be, kind of a technical resource that you'd cite in a report or something, but confidentiality is maintained. But it's, again, a good resource if you just need to bounce some ideas off of someone. Big initiative now. Charlene Drake, Sue Boyle, and Karen Barnes are looking to get us more of an online presence. Personally, I don't use Facebook or Twitter. I can't stand them, but LinkedIn I'm on. But you can see the instructions. You basically can go on these websites, join the group, you get accepted, you're in. Pretty basic. But it is a good way to get the message out. So for LinkedIn, you just sign in, go to the LSRPA group. You have to, again, request to join, and Charlene will, within about 24 hours, she usually accepts new members. We are always looking for active folks, and one of the common complaints in our organization is there's a core group of 50, 75 people that seem to be the most active. So we constantly are soliciting input and trying to get people active and being on committees, being engaged. I know personally the price of membership, I totally make up for it in just talking to my colleagues, going to meetings with DEP, going to these kind of events. So it's really worth it. As you can see, we've got many committees depending on what your interest may be. But again, I encourage you all to join up. An interesting thing coming up now, Sarah 2.0, especially with the elections, just occurred. Irene Kropp and Steve Senior lead that group or that committee. They're trying to put forth before the legislature some kind of low-hanging fruit, things we can change potentially if the legislature agrees. It'll streamline the process a little bit. So that's kind of an interesting one. It's kind of cutting edge. Again, I'm on the continuing ed. Risk management's very good. It's kind of help setting the standard of care. The sounding board, as you see, has just become a new committee. I think that's it. Yes, all done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next presenter is going to be Maria Vandesilver.
Hello, good morning. I'm Maria Vandesilver. I'm with the New Jersey DEP. I work in the Southern Field Office. I'm the co-chair of this committee along with Joel Friedel, who's sitting over here. So the title of our document is In Situ Remediation, Design Considerations, and Performance Monitoring Technical Guidance. This technical guidance was a collaborative effort between DEP and external stakeholders. In addition to the listed committee members, we received input and guidance from the additional individuals and wanted to acknowledge and recognize their efforts and contributions. In your handouts, you should find a list of acronyms that may be helpful throughout the presentation, as well as some tables. So, why was this document created? Why do we need this technical guidance document in training? Well, approximately 300 discharge to groundwater permit by rule proposals come through site remediation and are processed by the Bureau of Groundwater Pollution Abatement each year. The department wanted to provide guidance for in situ remediation, specifically design, implementation, and performance monitoring of in situ remedial actions. Based on submittals received, it was clear that guidance was needed. Departmental review of DGW PBR proposals revealed numerous inconsistencies and incomplete submittals, oftentimes missing critical information that is required and necessary in order to issue an approval. Information like construction details, depth to water, analytical data, and groundwater contour maps was often missing. The department also saw insufficient performance monitoring sampling points and inappropriate sampling parameters being utilized. Incomplete submittals lead to extensive dialogue between the department, LSRPs, and subsurface evaluators, thus delaying the review process. The department wanted to provide guidance for improving submittals in order to accelerate the review and approval process. So this slide is an example of an actual diagram that DEP received in a DGW PBR proposal. Take a look at the figure. What do you see? All I see are 2 monitoring wells, 2 went too fast. 2 monitoring wells, 2 injection points, and a radius of influence depicted. That's really all the department was provided. How is this remedy to remediate groundwater contamination identified on the site? The remedy is questionable. It seems as though the remedy is proposed to just clean up the 2 impacted wells and nothing else. There's no extent of groundwater plume identified or delineated, and no down gradient monitoring or groundwater flow direction, no sentinel wells either depicted. Later in the training during Joe Ludi's presentation, you will see a complete monitoring well network that depicts an appropriate design for evaluating the performance of the remedy and to document the protection of receptors. Next, I have a few slides from an actual homeowner UHOT site that was remediated via in situ. This homeowner was told that in situ would be less invasive to his property. And this is how his property looked for over 10 years. Poor site characterization and poor system design contributed to the site looking like this for numerous years. An understanding of the subsurface environment is critical when designing an effective remedial action and monitoring program. Not only was the source area where the tank was located greatly impacted by the remediation, but poor site characterization and system design led to daylighting of reagents as far as 40 to 50 feet away from the injection area. As can be seen, the daylighting caused a significant amount of damage to this property. The remaining slides will go through a brief overview of our entire document, including the appendices and tables. This technical guidance document is meant to enhance the guidance on site characterization concerns, selected considerations, and performance monitoring detailed in the groundwater technical guidance. It provides awareness to other regulatory hurdles, including air permitting, pinelands, highlands, homeland security, etc., and should be used in conjunction with other regulatory and technical guidance. The regulations discussed in our document are outlined in Section 3. The main regulations discussed are the technical requirements for site remediation, the NGPT's rules, and ARCs. Site characterization and in situ remedial design will be discussed in greater detail by Joe Ludi in the next presentation. This section covers the importance of adequate site characterization and development of a good conceptual site model. Both are critical in identifying source areas, defining plume extent, potential receptors, and predicting fate and transport. Distribution of reagents and contact time with the contamination is key to a successful remediation. This document stresses a holistic approach to be used to remediate sites, not to remediate individual wells. What this document does not tell you to do is which technology to choose. The investigator should use the information in this guidance document to determine which is most appropriate technology to remediate the site based on numerous lines of evidence. Sorry. Section 5, General Performance Monitoring Objectives, will also be discussed in greater detail by Joe Ludi in the next presentation. Section 5 covers remedial goals and performance objectives, performance metrics, and designing an effective performance monitoring plan. Section 6 goes into detail about the 3 broad classes of technologies: biological, physical and chemical, and thermal. The investigator should apply the general guidance outlined in Section 4 and 5 and the technology-specific guidance in Section 6 when preparing both the monitoring plan in the remedial action work plan and the monitoring plan in the DGW proposal. This section should also be used as applicable when developing the monitoring and evaluation plans for the remedial action permit application for active groundwater remediation. Later in the training, we will present 2 case studies that go into great detail on 2 of the technologies listed above. We have a chemical reduction technology case study utilizing zero-valent iron and a biological case study using anaerobic bioremediation to address chlorinated solvents.
Okay, this is your quiz. So everybody online, I hope you are paying attention to this. Which of the following is not a process that this technical guidance document covers? So we are launching. Are we ready? Okay. So we now have 60 seconds that we're going to discuss this. We have, your choices are biological, thermal, physical, and spiritual. Okay, so seems to be a consensus in this room what that answer is going to be. So let's see by a show of hands. Do we think the answer is A? No. B? C? D? There we go. All right. So just as a reminder that when we are done with the speaker and we have a chance to ask questions, please remember to wait for the microphone and introduce yourself at that time. So how much more time do we have? Oh, goodness gracious. This is fun to be up here and talk about this for another 30 seconds. Uh-oh, 11% haven't done this. You need to get on here, everybody.
Yes.
We do have 89% who have submitted this. And you need to answer 3 out of the 4 questions. So I hope the other 11% are, got 1 more, 2 more. We're doing well, everybody. Okay.
5 seconds.
So we have 60 seconds. All right, we're done. Handing it back over to Maria. And the answer, answer is?
Here, I'll push it. It's not moving forward. It's not moving.
There we go. And the answer is?
Spiritual.
You are all correct.
Yes. Okay. So Tracy Grabiak of the Bureau of Groundwater Pollution Abatement will be addressing the permitting section in the latter half of this presentation. Section 7 provides specific guidance regarding DGW proposals and the DGPD's PBR. There's an overview of the DGW proposal content, as well as specific technical guidance for DGW proposal and monitoring plans. There's also a great section on avoiding common pitfalls in the DGW proposal preparation, and also information for modifications to the DGW proposal, and a brief discussion on remedial action permits for groundwater. Section 8 provides guidance on reporting requirements associated with all key documents, predominantly the RAW and the RAR. Over a third of approvals issued by the department are for discharges to groundwater for UHOT cases. So we wanted to take a moment to make a quick note and reminder that UHOT cases are slightly different than LSRP cases in that they have an assigned case manager and more oversight from the department, including inspections by the Bureau of Field Operations. There are a number of useful tables presented within the document. There are technology-specific tables that are intended to aid the investigator in selecting the proper monitoring parameters for the specific technology utilized. You have a copy of 2 of the tables in your handouts. Joe Ludi and Karnam Ramanad will go into greater detail on how to utilize those tables in the next presentation. Appendix A, parameters and equations, lists numerous equations that can be used in the design of in situ soil and groundwater remedial actions. Equations are provided for the unsaturated soils, saturated soils, and groundwater. The equations can aid the investigator in verifying if in situ injections were performed as proposed or designed. Appendix B, field parameters and entries for field logs, is a 2-page appendix that goes into great detail on recommendations for field log entries. Detailed field logs should be recorded for each treatment event and for each permanent and temporary injection well. Information such as total volume, treatment reagent solution injected, start and stop times, and whether injections were gravity fed, injected under pressure, and noting instances of daylighting should be recorded for each treatment event. Appendix C is a monitoring for common reagents products list. This is a table which lists common suppliers and their treatment reagents. It also lists which technology is associated with a particular reagent and then directs the investigator to which technology table in section 6 they can use to determine the appropriate monitoring criteria. And then Appendix D is the acronyms. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Maria, very much. We won't be taking questions at this time, and we're going to go straight to Joe Ludi.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Maria. Maria had quite a few things to say, so I guess I've got a lot of topics to cover here. See if we could do it in 20 minutes. Again, good morning. I am Joseph Ludi. I'm the Technical Services Director at AECOM. I am a PE in New Jersey here. And for the better part of the past 22 years, I have been designing and implementing in situ remedial technologies. Today, as Maria mentioned, I'll be covering site characterization, remedial design, and general performance monitoring sections of the document, which are largely sections 4 and 5, but I do give a little bit of a sneak peek into section 6, kind of set things up for Ken and Carnum's case studies. Okay, so for those of you in the room who have been doing this for any amount of time, right, you've heard this before. In situ remediation is a contact sport, right? A little cliche, but it is very much the truth. If you don't get your reagents in contact with your contaminants, well, you're probably not going to have a lot of remediation. Kind of regardless of contaminants of concern, regardless of the type of reagents, the design needs to ensure that that contact between reagent and contaminant is occurring. And most importantly, the monitoring plan needs to be designed to ensure that that is actually occurring. So how do we make that happen, right? Good, thorough site characterization, good remedial design, presumably based on maybe one or more successful pilot studies, maybe some not so successful pilot studies. We learn things from those as well. And an effective performance monitoring plan to confirm that that is occurring. So our document is not a how-to on site characterization and conceptual site models, but there are some sections within the document that link the importance of conceptual site model to design, to implementation, to performance monitoring. What our document does include is some guidance on remediation, remedial action selection, and design considerations. Performance monitoring is going to be governed by the type of remedial technology that you've selected, and the ability to properly monitor that performance of the remedial action needs to be thought of not as an afterthought, but during the selection and design stages. Can I monitor for the things that I'm actually planning to do? The document has a little discussion on radius of influence, right? We all use the term. Perhaps the term's a little misleading. Radius tends to imply circular, but we all know that that's typically not the case when we go and inject stuff or extract stuff. So there's a little discussion in the document, perhaps for the less seasoned reader, some of the more junior staff that may be utilizing it, as to what the term radius of influence really means. The document includes some discussion on general implementation considerations, things like, well, where's the contamination? Where are the monitoring wells? Where are the injection wells? And can I put the monitoring wells that I need to put out on the site? If are there man-made barriers or maybe even natural barriers to putting those monitoring wells in place? As an example, we may have a design radius of influence of 30 feet, and we may be very concerned that we don't want to extend beyond 30 feet because it may impact a nearby receptor, whether it be a building, a surface water body, etc. So a good thing would be to put some monitoring wells at about 30 feet from your injection wells to confirm that you're actually getting a 30-foot radius of influence. So you go and you lay out your design, you put all your injection wells, and then you find out, well, here's the 30-foot point. I can't put a monitoring well there because that's an off-site property that I don't have access to. Or, oh, that's the middle of a parking garage, and I'm probably not going to be able to put that there or monitor it. So you may need to take a step back and retool the design just a little bit. Obviously, you still need to address your area of concern, your impact area, but maybe there's a different way of doing it such that you're still able to implement that monitoring well network that you need. Some of the other general considerations, are we treating all or just a portion of the site? Maybe it's just a pilot test and we're trying to, target a small area so that we understand if the technology is working before we go to scale up for the full area. And there's also some technology-specific considerations that are elaborated upon in Section 6. So a critical step towards successful remediation is integrating treatment design and dosing with the performance monitoring. The document includes some discussions on injection wells versus monitoring wells. So we're all tempted to see, well, there's that monitoring well over standard, so let me inject something into it and treat it. Well, it kind of doesn't really turn out to be a very good monitoring well after that point. So there's some guidance on there in terms of, not injecting into monitoring wells, and also considering, well, how close am I going to put my injection wells to my existing monitoring wells and have them still be useful to monitor the parameters that they're meant to monitor. Which brings up another good point is, well, what are we trying to monitor? Are we process monitoring or are we remedial effectiveness performance monitoring? Process monitoring is kind of during the actual remediation, and the remedial effectiveness performance monitoring is kind of before and after, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And there's also a discussion in the document on site contaminants versus competing reactants. Does the performance monitoring plan include all the constituents of interest at the site, not just the contaminants, but the reagents that you're injecting and other potential byproducts? So there's a section in the document on pilot testing. What is a pilot test? Why do I do a pilot test? And what are some of the benefits of pilot testing? What are some of the benefits of pilot testing? It's a good way to assess the feasibility and the effectiveness of the technology. It's a good opportunity to provide necessary design and scale-up data for full-scale remediation. Things like radius of influence, injection rates and volumes, and it even helps with remedial cost estimating. A lot of the things that go into the performance monitoring plan details. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the document gets into a discussion on the differences between process monitoring and remedial effectiveness performance monitoring, right? As I mentioned, process monitoring is typically during the treatment to optimize the process. Am I seeing increases in dissolved oxygen or changes in ORP? Am I seeing temperature increases, changes in groundwater elevation? What are the things that tell me that what I'm doing right now are actually what I intended to do? Is it reaching where I want it to reach? Is it not going too far? And then there's the remedial effectiveness performance monitoring. And that's probably a whole different set of monitoring wells. Those are the before and after. Okay, I started with this concentration. Now I'm down to this concentration. Maybe you're going to look at those after one treatment, after multiple treatments, and towards the end of your remedial life cycle. And there's going to be various performance metrics that you're going to look at to determine if the remedial performance objectives have actually been met. Kind of on a related note, monitoring for permit by rule for discharge to groundwater may not be the same as monitoring for a remedial action work plan. Remedial action work plan may include multiple areas of concern. It may include multiple contaminants of concern. Lots of different, certainly a lot more things in the raw than there may be in the PBR. The document also touches on remedial goals and performance objectives, right? Remedial goals and performance objectives need to be based on the conditions identified in the conceptual site model. There's a good discussion on interim goals versus final goals, right? Ultimate and final goals are typically based on achieving regulatory or statutory requirements. Whereas, remedial objectives may include any number of interim goals related to certain remedial milestones that may not necessarily be the end point or the final remedy. And again, we certainly see that interim remedial measures are often an important step towards achieving the success of the final remedy. There are often several performance metrics for each remedial objective, right? They should be technology specific, they're going to be site specific, and they should include multiple lines of evidence, to confirm that the process monitoring and remedial effectiveness performance monitoring goals are being met. And what are some of those? They may be groundwater sampling results, soil sampling results, mass flux analysis, reduction in plume boundary, source material, and other things. And it's important, again, as I mentioned earlier, that the process monitoring consider all the various media. So you may have a site that just has groundwater and soil impacts, and maybe you have some nearby surface water bodies or nearby buildings, and currently there's no impacts at the surface water or in the indoor air at the adjacent buildings. But you need to consider, your monitoring plan should consider whether or not those impacts are a potential once you start your remediation. Certainly the dynamics of the subsurface change as you start injecting things or extracting things or both. So there's some key factors in your performance monitoring plan that need to be considered as to whether or not those other media may be impacted. Things like location of the treatment area, contaminant mass flux with or without injections, number and location of injection and monitoring wells, timing and frequency of sampling. Okay, if I inject today, where might it get tomorrow? Where might it get a month from now? Composition of the remedial additive. Okay, I have to look for what I'm injecting to make sure it's not lingering on longer than it should be. Constituents and other constituents to analyze for both in the field and in the laboratory. Again, all this leading towards monitoring against unintended consequences, right? Understanding if there's preferential pathways that may lead to impacts to receptors that you didn't anticipate. As Maria mentioned, she showed a slide of a PBR site plan that was maybe a little lacking in detail. Here's something a little bit more useful to both the investigator who's designing and implementing the plan, as well as the folks at the department that are reviewing permit by rule requests. Right. So you've got our source monitoring, source area, treatment area defined in gray here. We've got source monitoring wells. We've got our injection wells shown, our injection well radius of influence, right? So that was kind of what we saw in Maria's example. But we also have background monitoring wells, plume monitoring wells. We show the extent of the dissolved phase plume. We've got some plume fringe wells, sentinel wells, groundwater flow direction. It provides a much more complete picture of what's going on at this particular site. And again, that's not just so that you can get your PBR approved by the department, but also helps you understand what you've got, how you're addressing it, and will be helpful during the actual remedial phase to monitor. Now, I promised a sneak peek into section 6 of the document, and here it is, right? Maria mentioned that we have lots of useful tables and appendices. So one of those tables, if you have in your handouts there, is table 1. It's of the performance monitoring parameter tables. It includes a list of field parameters as well as laboratory parameters for groundwater and soil, and the types of analyses using a numbering system to indicate by technology whether the monitoring parameter is 1, required analysis for DGW permits, 2, a recommended analysis for the particular technology that's being implemented, 3, a conditional analysis for the technology. Maybe you need it sometimes and maybe you don't need it other times, and 4, where the technology where the parameter just simply isn't applicable to the technology at hand. So here's a closer look at the table, right? Cover your right eye And, oh, never mind. So for all of us, and obviously you have it in your handout, right? So the heading of the table, includes a listing of the sampling media and the parameters. And this happens to be an excerpt from Table 1, which Carnum will review during his case study. Anaerobic biostimulation and bioaugmentation, a couple of different permeable reactive barriers, and anaerobic co-metabolism. So again, you've got a list of field parameters, lab parameters, and here's an example. Oops, way too fast. Here's an example where for volatile organic compounds, they get a 1 and a 2 rating under anaerobic biostimulation and bioaugmentation. So 1 being DGW required and 2 being recommended for the analysis of this particular remediation. Further down the list, you'll see TOC. So TOC gets a 2. So it's not necessarily required to be monitored for your DGW permit approval, but it's probably something that you want to be monitoring for in most cases in an anaerobic biostimulation or bioaugmentation approach. And then volatile fatty acids, and I think Carnum will discuss these as well. So this is something that, well, maybe under certain circumstances, for certain sites and certain reagents, it may be of interest to monitor and maybe not for others. So the point of including that in the table is to say, hey, investigator, this may be of interest to you, it may not be, but something that should be considered whether or not it falls into your plan. And lastly, at least for my session anyway, the document includes this commonly used reagent products reference. If you take a look at the table, it includes suppliers, trade names, additional information for several commonly used reagents. It also, as Maria mentioned, includes darn wrong button again. It includes the table numbers for the performance monitoring tables that I just showed you as to which ones would be applicable. So in this case, EVO would probably be applicable to the anaerobic bioremediation table, as well as the chemical reduction table, SEP. And again, this is not an exhaustive list in the document. It's by no means should it be construed to mean that the department is endorsing or not endorsing something by its inclusion or not inclusion. Just a list of things that the folks on the committee, felt were fairly commonly utilized and had a fair amount of experience seeing come across in the various proposals. So in summary, performance monitoring should be considered during the remedial action selection and design stages, not an afterthought. The performance monitoring plan should integrate with the details of the conceptual site model. Consider the benefits of pilot testing. If nothing else, it certainly provides a lot of performance monitoring plan details. The discussion on the distinction between process monitoring and remedial effectiveness performance monitoring. Again, the discussion on interim goals and final goals, and you probably have both of those. And again, encourages folks to use multiple lines of evidence when developing your remedial performance monitoring plans. And at the end of the day, use the guidance, the resources in this guidance document to develop effective performance monitoring plans for your sites.
Okay, now is your opportunity, both online and here, to ask any questions. Do we have any questions of what we have covered so far? We're going to be really early.
You've been quite thorough. That's very good.
Which is awesome in our presentations, I guess.
Very good.
Anything online? Let's give them a few minutes we'll give them a minute to type up. Nothing? Okay, then.
All right.
We sure there's nothing out here? Okay.
Thanks, Lynn.
Okay. And then,
Thank you.
and our next presenter is Ken. Okay.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ken Tyson. I'm a licensed site remediation professional and a senior project manager with Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. And you also see I'm wearing green today. I'm an avid Philadelphia Eagles fan. Joe Ludi is an avid Cowboys fan, but not to worry. I'm sure we'll be talking still after this coming Sunday. Not to worry. I'm here to talk to you today about a case study for zero-valent iron injection for the treatment of TCE and PCE in groundwater. And I was talking about a lot of the aspects that are covered in the performance monitoring guidance document. Zero-valent iron is addressed in section 6 of that document in detail, including a lot of the science behind the technology. And the process monitoring and performance monitoring requirements are, or not requirements, but recommendations are provided in Table 7. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this particular site. I'm then going to talk about a remedial approach, which was very much controlled by the site constraints, and there are a lot of site constraints at this particular on this particular project. I'm going to talk about our field implementation, which is a very, very complicated process for this project, and then take a look at our results. And we are...
Okay, we are live again with another question.
You click it.
They're going to do it. So what is ZVI? It is a type of permit. It is a program name within the Site Remediation and Waste Management Program. Or is it a material used in an in-situ chemical reduction technology? So here we go. Once again, they are going on and their time starts. So it's launching now. So that's why I thought I had so much less time last time, because now the clock starts. So now everybody has 60 seconds to fill in the answer. So what do we think here? Is ZVI a type of permit? Yeah, no. Is it a bureau name within the Site Remediation and Waste Management Program? Some chuckles in the audience. And how about, is it a material used in an in-situ chemical reduction technology? Yay. All right. So for the next 30 seconds, I will be standing here and reminding everybody that we have the new case study training, because we were told that, basically more by the people who are doing the training than anybody else, that we need to change it a little bit. We're tired of doing the same presentations. So the case study training that we have been given for the past 5 years, I believe, is going to be totally new and different come June. So we now have,
okay.
We're good to go.
Oh.
Oop,
Yeah, there we go. Okay, in terms of site background, no surprise, this is a former dry cleaning site at a large retail shopping center, and the operations of the dry cleaning resulted in a groundwater plume of up to about 20 ppm of PCE and similar concentrations of TCE. The project was, this is a brownfields redevelopment. The site was being redeveloped for continued use as a retail shopping center, but it had a very tight construction timeline, and all of the remedial actions had to be completed during the actual construction of the redevelopment. Prior to our coming onto this site, there were multiple investigations that have been conducted, including up to about 30 or so monitoring wells, both in bedrock, top of bedrock, and the shallow saprolite zone at the site, throughout the site. We came on board and we did a number of additional investigations, including a fair amount of geoprobe groundwater sampling. We also did a very extensive MIP investigation, that's membrane interface probe, to basically get a lot of data fast and allow us to fill in and increase the resolution of our overall picture of the distribution of contamination at the site. So we had a lot of investigation. We had a lot of data to deal with. So we were starting out this project in a pretty good place. Oops, what did I do? And then it was completed. So for this particular project, we had a very limited treatment time frame. The site was being redeveloped for a retail center. It was to be open for the Christmas shopping season, so the site had to be up and built, and all of our remediations had to be done by Thanksgiving. We could not be doing anything at the site between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Not only that, because this was an active construction site, a lot of activity going on all the time. Cranes, crews going back and forth. So we had a very limited area of the site that we could operate in. Once the site was built, we had to have no above grade operations. The area was to be a parking lot used for parking. That's it. We couldn't have anything above ground. And from a remediation point of view, our goal was to achieve significant mass reductions in the core area of the plume. And then we were going to allow for monitored natural attenuation to treat the remaining lower concentrations. And we'd done a very significant amount of three-dimensional fate and transport modeling to confirm that the M&A would work and that we would not impact any downgradient receptors. So just in terms of, we had a fairly elaborate conceptual model for a site. This is kind of a simplified view, a cross-section across the site. Basically three different aquifer zones that we were interested in addressing. Actually two, but there were three at the site. The lower bedrock zone, this is the crystalline bedrock aquifer, fractured bedrock aquifer. Fortunately, very little contamination in the fractured bedrock aquifer, low parts per billion range, if anything. So that was good for us. That changed once you get into the top of bedrock aquifer. All of this is saprolitic material, and this is just kind of the terminology that developed through the course of investigations by multiple consultants at the site. So this was commonly referred to as the top of bedrock zone, fairly tight formation, lots of clay, rock fragments, wetted rock fragments in it, fairly tight formation, relatively low porosity, low permeability, but a significant mass of the PCE and TCE was in this top of bedrock formation, pretty much right in this area. Then above that, we had a zone that was called the shallow saprolite zone. It had a much coarser texture. It was more sand. From a textural point of view, it was more like sand, but it still was saprolite material, higher porosity, higher permeability, somewhat lesser concentrations up in this zone. So when we were evaluating our remedial action for this particular site, we had a number of things that we had to consider. We evaluated multiple technologies, including pump and treat, SVE, so forth and so on. These guys were eliminated pretty much up front because we couldn't have anything at the site remaining once the site was built out. We looked at our microbial population. We basically found out that it was insufficient to promote significant biodegradation. But given all of the site constraints, given the fact that we had a limited area to work in, given the fact that we had a limited time frame, given the fact that we couldn't have anything above ground at the end of the day, we decided to go with ZVI for treatment of the source zone. We did conduct a treatability study using on-site soils and groundwater to confirm the effectiveness of the technology. However, given the time constraints, we simply did not have time to do a formal pilot study. We did do an informal pilot study at the beginning of the injection process, where we did an injection, we looked at our radius of influence, we looked at concentrations at certain locations, we looked at our iron concentration in groundwater and so forth. So we were able to determine that, yeah, it was working, but this was not anything near a formal pilot study type program. This is kind of a back of the envelope in the field. Does it look like it's working? Yeah, it does. This is, and we get into the science of it a bit more in the actual document itself, but this is over the overall reactions that we're talking about. Hydrogenolysis. Again, this particular one I'm starting at the TCE point, but this is the typical criminals you commonly see. You're talking about TCE, which degrades into your cis-1 DCE, down to VCE, and down to ethene at the end, with and also yielding significant hydrogen ions. Now, for this particular project, again, we had various different data sets. We had our basic groundwater data set. We also had a number of geoprobe groundwater points that we took. We also did an extensive MIP investigation. These contours here are basically looking at pretty much only of our monitoring well data, but this was our design was actually supplemented by the additional geoprobe data and the MIP data as well. And you can see this is our core zone right here. This zone down here, this over on the right is our top of bedrock zone distribution. This is our satellite zone distribution. You can see in our core zone, basically, given the distribution of mass that we derive from all of our data, including our MIP data, we determined that in the satellite zone, the shallow portions of the aquifer and the down gradient side of the plume, we basically only had to treat on the down gradient side of the shallow aquifer. All right. There was some contamination up here, but again, groundwater flow is this direction, so you're basically creating a curtain in that area that is going to flow through anyhow. In the bedrock zone, top of bedrock zone over here, basically we were treating it across the entire area of the core of the plume. You look at these two locations up here, kind of offset a little bit. That was something happened during the course of the investigation where the construction crew says, you can't inject at this location right here, right now. We got to have a road going through there, so we had to offset. So a lot of things that we had to adjust for. In 3 dimensions, this kind of shows it a little bit better. Again, these are our individual injection points. These discs down here basically represent our conceptual radius of influence, which is about 30 feet, which we ended up significantly exceeding. And in this depiction, groundwater flow is this way. And you can see, this is what I'm talking about. On the down gradient side of the treatment area, we basically injected throughout the thickness of the aquifer. And across the base, we basically distributed uniformly across. Now, these colors right here correspond to the mass of ZVI that we're injecting. And the thickness of each one of these discs represents an individual injection zone, okay? So you can see that based on the results of our geoprobe, our wells, our MIPS, we had a very significant difference in distribution of our ZVI application across the treatment zone. Very high across the base of the overall treatment zone, somewhat less in the shallow areas, and then on down gradient, we did the full thickness of the aquifer. So here's what we're talking about. We used microscale zero-valent iron, or ferrox is the trade name, dosage on average roughly about 0.5%, and it was injected using pneumatic fracturing. So this is the pneumatic fracturing technology over here on the right. Basically, you have a lower inflatable packer, an upper inflatable packer, and basically you go into a zone, you're working from bottom to top, you inflate your packers, you pressurize and basically fracture the formation. You do your injection. All the time you're keeping very good logs regarding fracture pressures, injection volume, injection mass, so forth and so on as you go up. So you treat one zone, you move it up, you repeat the process, inflate the packers, fracture it, and keep on going. This is what it looks like in the field. The ZVI was delivered to the site in large cargo containers. And within the container, the ZVI was in these 2,200-pound super sacks. This is a view of the super sack being delivered to our mixing unit by crane. The ZVI gets dumped in here into a hopper. It goes down to a mixing unit in here where we make up the ZVI slurry. And again, we took very detailed measurements regarding the amount of ZVI for each volume of water, so we know exactly the mass of the ZVI which was going into each batch. And then down here you had the various equipment associated with the actual injection of the ZVI. In terms of our injection process, this is our control unit for our fracturing operation. The fracture medium was actually compressed nitrogen gas. which we brought into the site. The first question I asked is, why aren't we just using compressed air? And the reason is that this is a reduction technology. We want to go anaerobic, so the last thing we want to do is be injecting oxygen into the subsurface. And it turns out that compressed nitrogen is commercially readily available and easy to use. This is our injection apparatus. Again, a lower packer, an upper packer, and our injection nozzle right in between. About a 5-foot difference between our upper and lower packers. During the injection, and these are part of the performance or process monitoring metrics, we monitored a number of different parameters. Probably the most important was our radius of influence. And one of the ways we evaluated our radius of influence is we laid out a network of very sensitive tilt meters in 3 dimensions radiating outward from a given injection point. And those were surveyed. And then as the injection was taking place, we measured the amount of ground heave on the surface. And that enabled us to determine that, yes, we were achieving both our minimum 30-foot radius of influence, but in some areas we were getting out to about 100 feet radius of influence. That was a bit of concern. Again, yeah, you want to have substantial radius of influence, but on the other hand, you want to hit your target as well. So we had to reduce our injection pressures to a certain extent to actually make sure that our radius of influence was not actually too large. This is what you don't want to see. This is what, when you're managing a project and you complete your first day of injections and your field people send you back a picture like this can't be good. As Maria indicated, daylighting is going to be an issue that you always want to be concerned about. What is daylighting? Well, you don't want your reagents to see the light of day. And when your reagents do see the light of day, it's called daylighting. And it comes with the surface, and it can occur from a variety of different pathways. In this particular case, we had a borehole location that wasn't properly grouted. So we had to go in and auger that location out and completely regrout that location. A variety of other things can happen too. I mean, just being kind of normal microfractures in your formation that can result in this. Now, there's a couple points here. In terms of, you look at this, and geez, it looks terrible. But we calculated, for that particular injection, we actually did an estimate of the volume of the ZVI that made it to the surface. And in terms of, when you compare the volume of the ZVI, or the mass of the ZVI that made it to the surface versus the mass that we're actually getting in the ground, is a fraction of 1%. So it's a very minor amount, but it looks terrible. And it's a mess, and you got to clean it up. And we did have to clean it up. Not only that, at this particular site, you see right over here, this is the pad for the building. And the construction crews had to go through a significant amount of effort to get the proper geotechnical characteristics for that pad. And the first thing they see is, my God, you guys are affecting our pad. You're going to owe us a lot of money if we don't get the proper compaction. Turns out we didn't affect the pad, but nonetheless, there's a lot of players here that are getting very upset when they see something like this. So what do? Well, first thing you do is obviously repair these, short-circuiting points. The other thing that we did was we took a look at the mass of ZVI that we're injecting in each location, and what we did is we basically increased the richness of the ZVI slurry. So what did that do? That basically allowed us to increase the mass of ZVI they were injecting at each location with the same volume of slurry, okay? Not only that, we decreased our injection pressures, slightly reduced radius of influence, but that doesn't matter. We had plenty of radius of influence to begin with. So we slightly reduced our ROI. We increased the richness of our ZVI, so we got the same amount of ZVI in the ground with a lesser volume of water. And that approach basically worked for the rest of the site. We got a little bit of data lighting here and there, but we were able to control it. So this gives you an idea of some of the things that we're working with. Again, this has to do with the remediation technology, in that this particular remediation technology was very effective, given that we had a very, very complicated and congested work area, ongoing construction site. You can see here's here's our geoprobe rig right here, and a crane transporting a major section of rafter right adjacent to it. So this is basically our treatment zone superimposed on the final site redevelopment, kind of an oval shaped. Again, given the time frames, we had to have 2 crews working simultaneously. Now, each one of these crews, for health and safety reasons, you're doing pressure fracturing, you're working with high pressure gases and so forth. You have to keep a radius of 40 feet on either side of the rig, which means a circle with a diameter of 80 feet around the rig, and nobody can go in that radius or that circle while you're doing the injection, okay? So we've got 2 rigs working simultaneously, and we got to keep them separated. So the way we did it was we had 1 rig working on this side and 1 rig working on this side, and we just basically walked the 2 rigs counterclockwise around this oval surface so they can keep the injections going simultaneously without violating that circle that nobody could go inside. Not only that, it's not only your injection crews, but it's also your construction crews. You know, we're operating, there's a building right here, and we're right in front of the building. We're exactly where they want to be. So we had to do a lot of coordination with the construction crews basically to get this done. You can see here, these are the outlines of 2 separate access roads, and we used each of these roads at different times during the process so they could have access to their site while we were doing the injections. So all of this had to be worked out with the actual construction contractor. So what do we have? At the end of the day, 21 injection points, approximately 401,000 pounds of ZVI injected, approximately 179,000 gallons of water, 29 days for the injection from February to March of the year. Critical, because we got our injections done, the construction process continued to take place, the building was built out, and they were open for, you know, Black Friday after Thanksgiving that year. So, as I mentioned before, the recommended both process monitoring and performance monitoring parameters for ZVI in terms of the locations, the frequency, the duration, that sort of thing, that's provided in Table 7 of the guidance document. For this particular program, we opted for 2 years of quarterly monitoring in selected source zone wells and downgrading wells, both in the saprolite and top of bedrock aquifers at the site. Our field parameters included temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, specific conductivity, and ORP. And our lab parameters included very simple, chlorinated volatile organic compounds, CVOCs. We also added iron in that as well. Okay. In terms of our results, and this, if I look at my field parameters, I think the probably 2 most critical parameters are pH and ORP. In terms of this is a typical top of bedrock zone well. Again, top of bedrock, that's where the concentrations were initially the highest. We had at this particular one, well, 20209R1, we had a 51% decline in PCE concentration from 6,000 down to 2,900. And this is at the end of the 2 years of quarterly monitoring. But the most important thing here is that, look, even though you're still above the criteria or the standards, the critical thing is that, look, your pH started here at around down here and went up, and pH started around neutral down here and went up to around 9 throughout the performance monitoring period. The ORP started slightly negative and then went really negative throughout your performance monitoring period. This means that the reagent's still in the ground, it's still working, concentrations are coming down, you're not there yet, but be patient, the process is ongoing. Okay? Then you look at another top of bedrock zone. Here at 218, we had a 97% decline in PCE concentration from 17,000 down to 494. Again, still above standard, but it's still going down. Your pH is still elevated across. Your ORP has dropped way down and continues to be down. Now, if you had, similar exceedance in your data, but your pH was basically neutral and your ORP was either 0 or maybe slightly positive, then there'd be reason for concern, because that means nothing's really going on and you're still there. But These data here for ORP and pH are critical because basically they tell you the process is ongoing. And then a satellite zone well, and both MW10 and MW13, we had about a 75% decline in PCE and about an 83% decline in PCE at MW13. So overall, we had a dosage of about 4% iron to soil mass ratio, and that was sufficient to treat about 20 ppm of PCE in less than about a year. Okay, so we had significant mass or significant concentration decreases over a very short time frame. Pneumatic fraction was very effective in creating significant porosity and permeability in our formation, so we can get our reagent in there. Again, it's a contact sport, and we were able to get contact. And then in terms of our treatment area, we determined that our actual treatment area extended about 110 feet down gradient from our initial treatment zone. So we were getting plenty of mass into the ground, and we were able to document the radius of influence was sufficient to meet our objectives and get the remediation accomplished. There we go. Any questions? Yes.
Wait till you get and say your name and then ask your question.
Yeah, Vince Agavino from Terracon. A couple of questions. The treatment area that you had, what was the overall area of that? You had 21 injections. I think you said 21 injection sites. What was that overall area? Number two was you had said you augmented the monitoring wells with MIP. I was just wondering how many borings, how many MIPs you did around that to
Oh. In terms of the overall injection area,
Yeah.
don't exactly know in terms of square feet. I'm going to say probably 4,000 to 5,000 square feet. I'm not really sure, but obviously we look at the figures and tell you that. But I'm sorry, what was the next question again?
I was just curious. You had said you had 20, 30 monitoring wells, and then you came in and you did some additional MIP work to further refine what that plume looked like three-dimensionally. I was just wondering how many MIPs you did to get that data, if you know.
We did approximately 30 MIP locations.
Okay.
And again, we're getting data at 5 foot intervals at each MIP location. So it's a tremendous volume of data. It's not really good quality data, but you get a lot of it and you get it fast. That's the important. And you tie that in with your fixed point monitoring wells, as well as the geoprobe data we had. We ended up getting a very good, very clear picture of the distribution of mass in the subsurface.
Okay, we'll take, there's a question in the back.
Carlton Parkman, New Jersey DEP. Can you give a little more detail on what you did as far as the treatability study was concerned?
Yes, we collected both groundwater and soil samples. And we basically, and I was not directly involved in this, but we collected both groundwater and soil samples. We took them back to the lab and did injections of discrete quantities of ZVI into those samples. And then over time, we measured the concentrations of both TCE, PCE, and all of the daughter products as well, all the way down to ethane. So we basically and I believe it was over like a two-month period, we measured those concentrations and we basically got total breakdown during that time period.
Okay, we have a question from online here. Did the pneumatic fracturing contribute to... that was one of the questions. I'm reading the last one. Did pneumatic fracturing contribute to reactant daylighting or result in any other side effects?
I'm not sure I can release the total cost of the remediation. In terms of the pneumatic fracturing, yeah, that's a problem. I mean, basically the majority of your fractures do go out horizontally. Some of them do go up vertically, and some of them intersect other, existing pathways like borings and so forth. So yeah, we were concerned that the pneumatic fracturing did contribute to some of the daylighting. That's why we
decreased our fracture pressures, which tended to decrease the radius of our overall fracture network. So that had to be adjusted as we went through the program.
Did concentrations of dissolved iron increase after treatment, and did it remain above standard? And then what was the department's position on the elevated dissolved iron? So you answer the first part.
Well, this is where I have to confess. This site was not a New Jersey site. So I was using this site as an example of the technology. This actual site was actually down in Maryland, and we worked on this with the department. In terms of the iron concentrations in groundwater, yes, they remain elevated, but we worked with this with the Maryland Department of Environment, and they were comfortable with leaving significant concentrations of iron in the groundwater over a period of time.
Oh, go ahead.
But for the department's position,
Well, I'm going to be talking next, and I will address this issue and how we resolve it. So let's hold off till then.
we'll do it that way. Were injection points abandoned using grout?
Yeah, that's right, yes. And as we were, absolutely we had to go back and regrout a couple of our geoprobe borings, which we kind of expected we have to do anyhow. But once we got into this program, we were very careful to make sure that the grouting process was very complete and very effective on our injection point locations.
And how was the surface spill addressed? Please.
With basic cleanup techniques, we basically got a bobcat over there and scooped it up and put it in drums and disposed of it off-site.
What was the vertical heave was observed and how much?
Very low. You're talking about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. Very sensitive, and that's why you have to have very sensitive equipment in order to measure it. But the point is that we were able to directly correlate that heave with the actual injection process. So you can see that as they were fracturing and as they were injecting, you would see it would go up, and then you could see it come back down again.
2 more questions. How deep were you able to collect the MIP data given the site geology?
We were able to get down to about 70 feet below ground surface. A couple locations were shallower. We got some shallow refusal, but we still got data from those locations. But our deepest was around 70 to 80 feet below ground surface.
The last question, if you are able to answer it, what are the current concentrations and the status of your project?
Current concentrations still remain above standards. We have a certificate of completion that was issued by MDE for this project. So we are able to determine that concentrations would remain above standards for about the next 15 years. That's our time frame based on our fate and transport modeling. In most locations right now, you're probably talking about TCE and PCE concentrations decreasing between about 10 and 15 micrograms per liter. So you've gone from very, very high concentrations, very in the ppm level, down to low ppb level.
Okay. Well, we have one more question in the back.
Hi, Bridget Sweeney, DEP. Were any contaminants generated in this ZVI? Were any contaminants generated in the ZVI process?
Well, yeah, obviously you get your daughter products. So TCE goes to cis-1,2-CDC, goes to vinyl chloride, goes to ethane. Now, as we're monitoring, we're looking at our daughter products and we're saying, look, cis-1,2-DCE is going up. That's a good thing. It's breaking down. So over the course of the remediation, for example, for cis-1,2-DCE, you expect an initial increase and then decrease as you go through the process. And that's exactly what we saw at this site.
Okay, since we don't have any other questions, oh wait, so close. How long do you expect the ZVI to last?
It's hard to tell. ZVI is expected to remain in the subsurface for a number of years, and as long as you have, the remaining chlorinated solvents in the groundwater, it's going to continue to do its thing.
Okay. So now that we are done, we will take a 10-minute break, and I will see everybody back here at 10:30.
Pointer,
I don't know. I haven't used it yet.
good time to. I think this may be a
Oh,
pointer.
forward, back.
Okay. And then
Which one is the pointer?
the red
The
one,
red, okay,
vertical.
that makes sense,
So,
yeah.
okay. And then if you want to go, well, this little slide, go to the next slide. Oh no, that's something else.
It's probably just the arrows now. Maybe go up to the close.
Oops.
I'm gonna run upstairs.
so eager to give you the presentation. There we go. Okay, everybody, we're now coming back to our presentation, and Tracy is our next presenter.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Very good. All right. I'm Tracy Grabiak. I'm a section chief in the Bureau of Groundwater Pollution Abatement. I've been with the department 33 years doing groundwater permitting and site remediation work. So today you'll be earning some of those regulatory credits. So I'm going to talk mostly about the discharge to groundwater proposals and the permit by rule that authorizes discharges that are part of in situ remediation. And also a little bit about other approvals and other permits. And all of this is covered in Section 7 of our technical guidance, the permitting section, which I'm sure Maria mentioned. So how many people here have some experience already with the permit by rule process? That's all right. Great. So you'll be familiar, hopefully, with some of the acronyms and abbreviations I'm going to start using. If not, we have a handout that lists them all. And at the bottom of that handout, if you take a look at it, there is a definition of permit by rule from the regulations. And the permit by rule originates in the NJPD's regulations. And you can see from the titles of subchapter 7 and 8 where we get the terms DGW and UIC. And section 7.5 of the NJPD's rules describes the discharges that are authorized by permit by rule. And it also refers to various parts of the tech rules. And as we go along, we'll talk about the details of those PBR-related tech rule requirements. Okay, so some permitting basics. You need some type of NJPD's permit for most injections and all discharges of pollutants onto or into the ground. Now, I'll explain what I mean by most injections in a little while, so don't worry about that. And the term DGW includes discharges that are just in the unsaturated zone, maybe for soil treatment. It's still called a discharge to groundwater. The purpose of the permit monitoring is to look for potential and expected negative impacts of the discharge. So it's a little different focus from the raw monitoring, which of course includes looking for those positive impacts. And Joe had mentioned that. So the permit by rule is a type of permit that you are deemed to have when you comply with certain specified requirements in NJPD's or the tech rules. The permit by rule that site remediation developed includes all discharges that are part of remediation regardless of the duration of them. It also includes discharges that are from dewatering at contaminated sites, and also if you have to dewater to remove or install an underground storage tank. So what are those specified requirements? You need to submit a DGW proposal to the department and get our written approval of it. One thing to keep in mind, the DGW proposal is not officially a NJPD's permit application. It's not subject to the same requirements as permit applications, but if you call it that, it's okay. A lot of people here do that too, but that's the official name. And we also developed some PBR provisions that are for limited types of discharges, those that are associated with sampling, installing, or developing monitoring wells. And the requirements that apply to those discharges are in these two parts of the tech rules and these two sections of the field sampling procedures manual. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, which gives us some common examples of discharges and whether or not a permit is needed for them, whether or not the permit by rule requires a proposal and our written approval. And the first one is why I said most injections before. If you're doing air sparging or injecting dissolved oxygen, or injecting oxygen to increase dissolved oxygen, we've said no permit for that. It is regulated by the tech rules, but no permit. The next one is the purge water related discharges that I mentioned. Yes, there are PBR provisions and a permit for that, but it doesn't require getting or putting it in a proposal or getting our approval. But if you wanted to inject that same purge water, then it does need to be included in a proposal that gets our approval. And the last two are examples of typical discharges that are part of remediation. You'll note ozone is included there. And both of these, you need to put it in a proposal and get the department's approval. Okay, these are some of our guidance documents. Section 7.1 of our technical guidance includes pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about today. The instructions for the form associated with the DGW proposal are very detailed. Please use those when you're filling out the form and when you're preparing your proposal. There's a lot of detail in there. The next guidance document is from 2007, the NJPT's technical manual. In 2013, we wrote up an update page that tells you which regulatory citations in the 2007 manual are out of date, what procedures changed, and some other information. So definitely read that update page before you use the manual. But there's a lot of detail in that manual that isn't anywhere else. Okay, so it is very useful still. And it also explains the PBR for purge water and those types of discharges that don't need our approval, and refers to the two sections of the field sampling procedures manual that include the requirements for those discharges. Okay, so how do you get started with this process? You submit your form, your fee, and your proposal to BCANE. Everybody knows BCANE, right? So they'll put it in our database and make sure the fee's there and refer it to our bureau for review. You can get into Data Miner and find out when it was referred to our bureau, and once we assign it to someone, who we assigned it to. So you can call them to find out the status if you want. And our average turnaround from the time a complete submittal goes to BCANE until you get your approval letter is 4 weeks. Okay, so it's good to understand that there's a difference between the permit duration and the discharge duration. The permit duration starts on the date of the approval letter. It's limited to 5 years maximum for an NJPT's permit. Usually it's much less than that, but that's the maximum, 5 years. And the discharge duration, on the other hand, does not start until something actually hits the ground, goes into the ground, okay? And that should be included in the proposal and no longer than needed. And if it's more than 180 days, there's the public notice requirement, but we have exempted UHOT sites from that. Oh, our test.
Okay, once again, we have a test question. So what is the maximum NJPT's permit duration? Is it 100 years, 50 years, 10 years, or 5 years? So let's ask the room, do we think it's 100, 50, 10? Okay, 5? All right, so we're paying attention here. I hope everybody online is doing that as well. I have lots more time because reading those answers didn't take up too much time. So I'm going to take this opportunity to let you all know that part of our changes to the case study training is going to result in us doing a lot more hot topics coming up in the next couple of months. So we're going to be covering some of that information that we were covering in the case study. We're going to be updating it, revising it, and giving you that information as we do for the hot topics. They'll be in the evening, so hopefully that'll make it easier for the LSRPs to attend. Our first one, I'm going to give you a little preview. That is going to be, we're going to have Isra We're going to have Jim Bono give a presentation, Josh Gradwell, on ISRA. So that should be very interesting and exciting. And I've done my 60 seconds, and there you go. 5 years was the answer.
Very good. Okay, so what needs to be in the DGW proposal? Section, or in the tech rules, there are 8 items listed in 5.6B of the tech rules. And in the next 3 slides, I've broken it down into 11 different components. I'm not going to talk about every one of those in detail. I'm just going to focus on some key things and try to explain some of the things that are maybe a little less well understood. So the RI summary is should include all the data that's available at the time the proposal submitted, that and the most recent data for the area of the treatment and any areas that could be impacted by the discharge. The chemical components of whatever the reagent is, and focused on in situ remediation technologies, is very important to tell us everything, list everything that's included in the reagent. The safety data sheets are a good source of that. Am I too close? Am I too close to the mic, or is it good? Oh, dear. Technical difficulties.
Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute, hopefully only 2-minute technical break because we're having technical difficulties with getting this back online. The screens were not advancing, so people in the webinar were having technical difficulties, so don't go too far.
Dear.
I'm so sorry this happened to you.
What's that?
I'm so sorry this happened to you. Do we know this? Go back to the... Our technical difficulties have been resolved. So everybody here in Trenton, please get back to your seats so we can give Tracy our full attention again. Thank you.
Alrighty, so I'll start over from this slide since people online apparently didn't hear what I said. Okay, so what needs to be in the DGW proposal? In the tech rules, there's a list of 8 different items, and in 5.6B of the tech rules, in the next 3 slides, I've broken it down into 11 different components. I'm not going to talk about each one of those, but I will focus on some of the key issues and on some of the less well understood things. The RI summary should include all the available RI data at the time the proposal is submitted, and including the most recent data. The chemical content of whatever your reagent is very important to be specific about that. The safety data sheets contain a lot of good information in that regard, but if there are constituents that are in there in lower concentrations, they may not be included in the safety data sheet, so let us know about those too. Include that in your description. Okay. And nothing's happening. Oops, no, I went too far. Okay. So a lot of information was covered already about the design. And I think your slides are the printed slides are slightly different here regarding the design information, but we're talking about not engineering design, but giving us a detailed conceptual design. And include all the information shown here, and also a map of the treatment area, as was depicted in some of Ken's slides, that shows the horizontal extent of the treatment area and the vertical extent. As far as the volume of the discharge, we're looking for the total volume of the mixture of reagent and dilution water, your best approximation of that total volume. And okay, so now we get into some information regarding that question that was asked about the iron. We want a description of all the potential effects on all receptors, not just groundwater, but anything else that could be nearby, as Joe mentioned in his talk. But if and this should also include whether or not there's expected exceedances of any materials that are of exceedances of the groundwater quality standards from any materials that are in any of the reagents, such as iron. Could affect pH, of course. It's a lot of sodium sometimes in these reagents. So talk about whether or not you expect any of the groundwater quality criteria to be exceeded because of the discharge. And I'm going to talk about 9 and 10 a little bit more in the next couple slides, but that is relevant to how you maintain compliance with the groundwater quality standards, even though you may have some of these exceedances of some criteria. Okay, as far as the reporting, usually the permit data should be included in the RAR. There may be some situations where it needs to be reported before that, but that's the usual, typical thing. And the guidance talks about situations where it might be appropriate to submit the data more frequently. So, I mentioned before about the purpose of monitoring, and that should be, keep that in mind when you're designing the monitoring plan. That could impact, all aspects of it, including the duration of monitoring. Getting baseline groundwater data is very important. There's a lot of other sources of, iron and sodium out there, so you want to know, where you're starting with those things that are in the reagent, so that you can then compare to, the baseline data to the post-injection data and see what kind of impacts resulted. Process monitoring, that could be, looking for the daylighting issues that Ken mentioned, and if there's vapor intrusion, if there's buildings nearby, that would be something to monitor during the injection. We're not as concerned about the daylighting unless it has some kind of significant negative impact on a receptor. So that's kind of the focus of the permit monitoring. Okay. And Joe covered in a lot of detail the information that's in section 5, 4, and 6 of our technical guidance. So definitely use that when you're developing your plan. I'll just mention about the sampling methods. The sampling methods. There's some couple paragraphs in section 5.4 about the possible impacts of sampling methods on your results. So take a look at that. In the next section, there's guidance that's more specific to the permit monitoring. We talk about the duration, things that can impact that, and the contingency sampling. If the impacts of, iron or sodium or whatever it is last a little bit longer than expected, then you may need to do some additional, extend your monitoring duration, and we call that contingency sampling until you get back to baseline or meeting the criteria. So here, the permit-related CEA is how we maintain compliance with the groundwater quality standards rules, even though there could be exceedances of some of the criteria. This type of CEA is regulated totally differently than the site plume CEA. The site plume CEA is subject to the ARCS rules and, submitting the CEA fact sheet form and the GIS deliverables. None of that applies to this permit-related CEA. It's just based on what's in your proposal, and it's established when we issue the approval letter. And there's a lot of discussion about that in that 2007 manual that I talked about before in the appendix. So you can take a look at that to see what all is involved. It's not really as onerous as it might sound. Okay, so in the last two sections mentioned here, we have a lot of information on reporting and compliance, and if you want to modify the plan, the proposal, after it's been approved. In the compliance section, we talk about if you do have exceedances of some standard and it lasts longer than the permit monitoring or the duration that was expected, then those constituents can be added to the site plume CEA at the point when you are applying for your remedial action permit. Okay, so, and on the modifications, you want to read the PBR discharge authorization letter. There's a lot of good information in there, and at the end of it, it gives you the name of the person who prepared the letter, and if you want to do modifications, you should contact them to find out the procedure that's applicable to the change you want to make. Usually that can be, or often that can be done just with the exchange of emails, so it's not too difficult depending on how significant the change is. And then we have a section on common pitfalls, things that frequently delay getting your approval, so you want to look at that section and avoid these issues. The monitoring plan not being, detailed enough is one of the more common issues there. Okay, so this is the last slide on the DGW proposal. And next we have information that we included on other approvals and other permits. Section 7.2 on for the well permits and the air pollution control permits. We basically just have links to where you can get other information. And if you have sites in the Pinelands or the Highlands, there's a couple of paragraphs in there that could be useful for doing remediation in those two areas. We also included a FYI for considering any security issues. If you remember the picture of the ZVI that Ken showed, somebody might think that's something that poses a security risk. Looks a little bit like gunpowder. And so we included a link to Homeland Security to contact them, and just something to consider to hopefully avoid any delays that might be caused by those concerns. And then last, we have the section that talks about the remedial action permits. Of course, everybody knows those are a totally separate permit than the permit by rule, different purposes. But the monitoring plan under the RAP you can use the same guidance to develop that. And we also have quite a bit of information in there about things they should be aware of when you're collecting your data after you, for your permit monitoring, and you're getting ready to apply for your remedial action permit. So when you're in that situation, there's some information in here that could be relevant. And, the concern about adding parameters that were exceeded because of the discharge in the CEA for the site plume. And there's also, if you already have a remedial action permit, we put some information in there that you should take a look at if you decide that you want to do some type of discharge after you already have a remedial action permit. Okay, so that was it. And if you have any questions after today that we don't answer today, these are the people to contact besides myself, Joel Friedel and Mary Ann. Okay, so if there's any questions, you can try to handle them right now.
Okay, remember, if there's any questions here in the room, introduce yourself and we will hand you the microphone. Do you have any questions for Tracy? We do have some here online. Is the permit-related CEA only in place for the duration of the permit by rule?
Okay, what it explains in the Appendix A of that 2007 document is that it depends. The permit duration can be extended for as long as the exceedance is there. So, if there's no impact, then it ends, or if the impact is dissipated or no longer there at the end of the permit monitoring, then the CEA, permit-related CEA, ends then. So it can kind of just bleed into the CEA for the site plume if the constituents don't go away as quickly as we'd hoped. Which, for some things is a good thing, because then you still have your treatment going on. But that's how we deal with the issue of, having the iron hang out for quite a while.
Our next question online is, are public notices required for PBR applications?
It depends on the duration of the discharge. If it's not a UHUT site and the duration is longer than 180 days, then yes, there's a public notice requirement, and that is explained in the instructions. Probably have the best for the form, probably have the best description of the public notice requirements right now.
And our last question online is, for the PBR, how does one determine the monitoring schedule?
Well, that's pretty site-specific. Typically, quarterly is often appropriate. If you expect there to be some type of impacts during the injection, vapor monitoring, then you'd want to do more frequent monitoring during the injection. But for groundwater, it's, we said site-specific, but quarterly is for a year or two is typical.
Okay, so I was mistaken. We have a few more questions now. So historically, Historically, post-discharge groundwater reports are required within a set time frame. Please explain what the reporting requirements are currently. The next milestone report only as a specified in permit.
Right. Well, for LSRP lead sites, usually the permit data can just be put into the RAR. If there are some type of compliance problems, then you may need to submit that data, right after the whatever the compliance issue is. Forgotten the question. So what was it on the reporting? Okay, sorry. If there are any other site-specific concerns, it would be stated in the letter, the PBR discharge authorization letter. For UHOT sites or for long-term discharges, then some type of annual reporting may be appropriate. For traditional oversight cases where there's a case manager, they would indicate what, reporting schedule that it would be appropriate for those.
Okay, is semi-annual sampling ever allowed?
Yes.
That was easy. Some parameters, like pesticides, require specialty analytical methods. Not sure what the question is. So,
I wonder.
so can we ask first? Okay, does the permit applicant, go one up? Can you go up? Does the permit applicant need to monitor for all analytical chemistry parameters listed in the GPDDW form?
Let's see. I think this is, well, I would say probably not. It depends on, what the, site contaminants are and what is in your reagent. Your monitoring should be based on that. I'm not sure what form they're referring to there because I don't think our PBR discharge authorization request form includes anything like that. Maybe could be thinking of the spreadsheet that is associated with the RAP application. But again, it's site-specific, the monitoring parameters.
Is there a minimum volume required for a pilot test DGW, or are all pilot tests required to be permitted regardless of volume, duration, etc.?
Anytime there is a discharge of pollutants to the ground or some type of injection that includes pollutants, you need a permit.
Why is the duration of the PBR 6 months by default when when these types of projects typically take 1 to 2 years?
The duration can be whatever you propose it to be. The 6-month thing is just for the public notice requirement. So you need to say what the duration is. For the permit duration that I talked about, the 5 years, if you have a discharge that you think is going to last longer than that, then at the end of that, or when you're getting close to the end of the 5 years, you just need to submit a new proposal and, update it, and we'll give you a new approval letter. So it's kind of a renewal every 5 years.
Are pilot scale injections typically transitioned to full scale through a modification of the existing permit, or would the department prefer a separate permit application be submitted, or is this case by case?
Yeah, case by case or preference. If you want to do the pilot study first without having to worry about the public notice, then, just do it for the 60 days. During that, or 180 days, during that time frame, you can submit a second one with a longer duration. Or if, the next duration is also going to be a short duration, then you can just do a separate one. Or, if you want to not have to worry about having to submit a form and fee, then you just do the public notice, and then you can basically have all the time you need.
Does the performance monitoring data under PBR need to be submitted as EDD to the department website?
No.
That was easy. I like that one. If ISCO resulted in oxidation of all VOCs to below the groundwater quality criteria, but sodium is still above the criteria, can the CA be lifted and the RAP terminated?
Okay, I knew we were going to get this question. Yeah, if there is an exceedance of groundwater criteria from, a discharge of whatever sort of discharge, then a CEA is needed. Yeah, so, hopefully things can be done to get rid of that sodium and, make sure you know what's in the background because, if there's background contamination. Obviously, we're not going to make you have a CEA for that. And hopefully it will.
Bottom line is, if something's above standard, then you can't lift the CEA and terminate the RAP.
Yep.
Okay. For the RI summary requirement, the RIR, RI complete will be at the DEP already. Would a part or portions of the RI be adequate, or could we simply enclose it with the application?
Yes, if the RI is complete, that would be fine for the RI summary. Although if it's an older RIR, we do want the most recent data. So you could just, add an addendum with the most recent data.
Okay, so we answered that top one already, or at least we think we did. Oh, please repeat the sodium aspect again.
Ooh. I guess that means concerning the CEA.
Yeah.
The permit-related CEA is established when the permit or when the discharge is approved. The sodium, there are lots of other sources of sodium. So again, make sure you get your baseline data clear. And if the sodium does not dissipate by the time you're ready for applying for your RAP, then it needs to be included in the site plume CEA. And I know in some cases we have gotten creative and tried to use dilution as the solution for sodium. At some homeowner sites, I know we have said, irrigate your lawn a lot. For natural attenuation, dilution is part of how things are attenuated. So this is not so different. So that's another idea.
Do we have any other questions from people here in the room? Okay. I think we got to thank you. And thank you very much. And we will now be moving forward to our last speaker. So thank you, and here's Karnam.
Yeah, there were like 60 plus people in the audience before the start of the presentation, and we still have the same number. After the break, thank you very much for your patience and continue to stay during the last 30 minutes of our presentation. So my name is Karnam Ramanad with Brown & Caldwell, and I'm 20 plus years in the consulting industry. And actually, Joe Ludi and Ken Tyson has made my job easy. They focus on the core of the performance monitoring for this document, and also with the case study where ZVA is involved. And today I'll be talking about the performance monitoring description of several technologies. Is described in section 6, such as in situ bio, in situ chemical oxidation, in situ chemical reduction, the thermal. So for this presentation, I'll be talking about the in situ bio using a case study. So a couple of slides on the site background, covering the hydrogeology and the contamination of the site itself, and what are the standards applicable for this site, and what is the treatment we have selected to meet these the site-specific standards, and also a proof of concept pilot test covering permitting through the results of the pilot test, and finally what is the lessons we learned from the pilot test, and what are the results we got and how we scaled up to a full scale level. So basically, the contamination is due to historic printing press business operations. So by that, there was industrial wastewater stream which was generated, and there was at the site there was wastewater removal systems to take care of this contamination, which kind of led to a source for TCE, and the impacts were at the site were both at the overburden and the bedrock. And so overburden is primarily made up of till and peat, and the till itself had all sand fractions with gravel, silt, and stringers of clay. And the bedrock is primarily or strictly sedimentary rock with alternative sequences of siltstone and sandstone. So TCE is the major contamination or bulk of the contamination at the site. There is tremendous natural attenuation of TCE. By that, we see a significant amount of daughter products, which in this case is cis-1,2-DCE and vinyl chloride. And the groundwater has migrated from overburden into the shallow bedrock, and the groundwater flow at the site is towards east.
Okay, here it is. The last quiz question of the morning. Which of the following is a breakdown product of PCE? Is it xylenes, cis-1,2-DCE, benzene, or MTBE? So, we'll ask the room the question. Do we think the answer is xylenes? Do we think the answer is cis-1,2-DCE? That's nice. Benzene? Yeah, or MTBE. Okay, just figured I'd give all the answers out anyway. Okay, so for the next 45 seconds, I will remind everybody here in the room to please sign out. Be patient, because everybody has to sign out, who not the DEP employees, but everybody else, so that they can get credit. Don't forget to do that, because if you do not sign out, then it doesn't count. Okay, so I still have another 20 some odd seconds to go, but it looks like most of the people who have been putting in the answers, we got up to 92 this time. This is really good. So I want to thank everybody for coming and for staying, and we are just about ready to go. So 2 seconds, and there we go. We're closing it out. And the answer is, there we go. Good job, everyone.
All right, a couple of slides on the site features itself. So the site is located next to a major highway, and the site is behind an office building, and the access to backside of the building is very limited. A lot of access permits has to be obtained from the highway authority. And also, we need to be working very carefully with the drillers and injection contractors, particularly, the road or the access road to the site from the back of the building. We need to make a sharp right angle where, again, the access is very limited. So we need to do, proper planning to get all the equipment. So the red circle is the source from that the printing press operations, and then the groundwater flow direction here is shown in the blue dashed arrow, which is which is east southeast. One more slide. This slide shows the cross section. So the different colors you see is the overburden. From left to right, the depth of the overburden increases. Below that, the gray color is the bedrock. And we do have monitoring wells covering the overburden, the shallow, and the deep bedrock. I think the contamination is right now somewhere from 1/3 of the slide from your left all the way to the right side of the slide. That's where most of the contamination is. So the standards for, like most of the New Jersey sites here, is class 2A aquifer, so which means for PC, TC, and vinyl chloride, it is 1 micrograms per liter. And the technology we chose was well, the way we wanted to meet this goal is through an active treatment followed by M&A sequentially, and doing that multiple times. The permits required for doing the pilot test, all my colleagues have already talked about that. The permit by rule, discharge to groundwater for injecting the electron donor source for this testing, and also some of the permits required by the driller from Bureau of Water Allocation with regard to installation of certain injection wells and drilling at the site. So because we have a lot of natural attenuation going on at the site, it made a lot of sense to go with anaerobic biostimulation, or what we call enhanced reductive dechlorination. And then we targeted, as part of the pilot test, both the overburden and the bedrock, shallow bedrock. And for the pilot test, the long-term electron donor used was a microemulsion. It's 3 microemulsion. And finally, we compared the post-injection results with a baseline and try to see if the TC is degrading to monitor the performance of the pilot test. So we had 10 injection points, and 7 of those were direct push points using a geoprobe. And the remaining 3 were through injection wells because we were targeting the bedrock. And the dosing is typically, depends on the site-specific parameters. For example, what is the nature organic carbon we have at the site? What is the conductivity or the flow velocity? What is the porosity? And of course, what is the electron acceptor load in the groundwater, which is things like sulfate, the nitrates, typically sulfate, because most of your electron donor demand, about 75% or greater, is due to sulfate more than the contaminant itself. So we had all this data. And then we eventually dosed it. I think Joe already talked about table 1 we have in the handout. If you can refer to the table, I'll go through the next few slides referring to the table back and forth. So basically, we looked at all these performance monitoring parameters for the pilot test. For example, VOCs. I'm repeating myself, but it's the core of the document. So we did VOC, it was scored a 1, which means it is part of the DJW permit requirement, and 2, it is also a recommended parameter for this particular technology. And again, TOC, it is a recommended, parameter for most of the anaerobic, treatment technologies. And sometimes, if the project budget permits, you can also go the next step of doing a volatile fatty acid analysis. And the reason you do that is, that is things like acetate, lactate, those kind of organic acids. And the reason you do it is when you inject some emulsions or oils, it doesn't travel as much in the soil. But if you want to have a good radius of influence, let's say 20 or 30 feet down gradient, lactate is highly soluble, so you can get that information, which you typically may not be able to get from TOC itself. TOC costs maybe $20, $30 a sample, and 3 times as much is VFAs. But then you don't have to do all the wells. In this pilot test, we had about 8 wells, and we were able to do 2 wells, start and end for VFA. So that's a choice. And as far as the geochemistry is concerned, definitely the sulfate, the iron, and the chloride, those get number 1 because it's part of the DGW permit. And then the others, such as nitrate or even dissolved iron, those are 2 which is recommended, for this technology. And bromide is like a conditional parameters. We have used tracer, so we know, where the injector reagents are traveling. So we did analyze for bromide as well. And then eventually, the byproducts. I mean, if iron is reduced, you get a spike in ferrous iron. Likewise, if you, reduce sulfate, you get a spike in hydrogen sulfide. So we had both analyzed as part of the field kit. And then, and as part of the lab parameters, the end products is, which is ethene, ethane, and methane, which we do for most of the chlorinated solvents. And then finally, the required field parameters as part of the DGW permit, which is those 5, and clearly ORP is the driving force. We want to have a negative ORP, at any of the anaerobic testing. So as part of the monitoring well network, we had at least 2 wells in upgradient locations, 2 within the treatment zone, and 2 at the down gradient. So the idea of upgradient wells would be, what is the geochemistry of water flowing into your treatment zone? So any changes in the geochemistry you can measure and have some idea on the performance of the technology. And then at the down gradient locations, you will have some idea about the radius of influence. I mean, how far from the injection area you're able to see the influence of your injectates. So 3 slides on the results itself. This is a graph that is plotting concentration versus in micrograms per liter versus time in months. Now, if you're really looking at a mass balance, you may be interested in showing this as micromoles or molar, not the ppb concentrations. So time scale, 0 month, that's when we injected the substrate, and -5 is the baseline sampling, 5 months prior to the injections. What is the data we are going to compare the post-injection results with? So there are 2 points as part of the pilot testing. One was at 2 months, another was at 5 months. And then we extend the study going 2 years, and then we picked up a point in 24 months. So as you can see, the red line, it decreases from 1200 or so ppb down to less than 500. So we have a TC decline accompanied by the green line increase transiently, which is the cis-1,2 DCE. And more interestingly, the insert graph, which is the blue bars, that is vinyl chloride. So the vinyl chloride is about 2 ppb before we started any injections. And as we went into the process post-injection, that has increased at least 3-fold, which is a good sign. And then the purple bars is the ethene, which is the innocuous end product and the non-chlorinated byproduct of this TCE. So basically, if you look at the right side pathway, we got TCE going all the way to ethene, which is what one would like to see. And I think the fundamental thing is after the injections, the blue bars, the vinyl chloride, that is increasing. That's a telltale tale that the technology is working, and the organic carbon and electron donor you choose to inject is meeting its goal. This is another similar slide, but this is monitoring well 3, again covering the ore burden part. This is about 30-40 feet down gradient from where we injected. We do see decrease in the TC concentration, but 2 years there is some kind of a rebound. But then that's accompanied by again the cis DC transient buildup, and then the vinyl chloride, and then increase in the vinyl chloride concentration, the blue bars. And of course, we do see trace amount of ethene. So this is all as a result of injections. We do see byproducts increase, and that's the whole purpose of biostimulation. Is it stimulating? Yes, I think we do see that evidence. One more well. This is in the bedrock where we injected close to the injection locations. The trend is the same, which is TC decline is accompanied by the byproducts accumulation. Now, the other thing you also want to see besides the VOC itself as a secondary evidence is changes in the geochemistry. Remember, I talked about upgradient locations was the treatment zone. For example, this is monitoring well 4D, which is in the bedrock. we're trying to compare pre versus post injection. So yeah, you do see about 5-fold increase in TOC, which is good because we injected the reagent, and we do see it, and we're glad to see in the well because we know it's flowing towards that way as designed, the substrate. And there is two things happening with other geochemical parameters. One is sulfate; it is decreasing by 5-fold, and then the methane, which is at least increasing more than an order of magnitude. So the sulfate reduction and methane formation, those are strictly an anaerobic process, and anaerobic environment is required for dechlorination. So it all kind of correlates well. And we're also glad to see bromide show up in the wells, up to 2 milligrams per liter. So we know, at least we have some idea about the reagent travel. So with the lessons learned from the pilot study and also based on the results, we scaled it up. We were comfortable to scale it up to full scale. And these are some of the things associated with the components with the full scale, and starting with the permitting, the baseline sampling, which was already done like 3 months ago. We just started this project the last quarter. And so as part of the injection itself, for the ore burden, we have 10 points again, all direct push points, and we constructed 5 new wells. And we already had 3 injection wells originally, so there's a total of 8 injection wells covering the treatment area. And this time we also included a bioaugmentation, which is injecting the bacteria, Dihalococoides, as you all know, that degrades TCO all the way to ethene, and we wanted to not only biostimulate by adding the electron donor, but also adding the culture, which will help tremendously the degradation kinetics, because it's not that much extra investment to do a bioaugmentation when you're already injecting an electron donor. So as part of the performance monitoring itself, we included all the parameters we did for the pilot, but we also did 2 things here extra. One is census bacteria, which is scored rate 3, which means it's a conditional parameter. If you have a technology, if it's worth doing it, go ahead and include it in your program. So we did that, and then basically you would monitor how many Dihalococoides population is present at the baseline, and so you can compare your post-injection, an increase hopefully, and then looking at the enzymes itself, which can degrade the vinyl chloride past to ethane. So we did that. We also included compound-specific isotope analysis, commonly referred to as CSIA. You could do carbon and chlorine here, so we prefer to do carbon because we know it's our plume and we're treating our plume. And then sometimes when you have the back diffusion, such as we are observing at the site, it can probably help you differentiate the degradation versus back diffusion based on the CSIA numbers. And then next February, we're picking up our first post-injection sampling, and end of next year, 2018, we'll be wrapping up at least some idea about the post-injections. So to conclude, yeah, it made a lot of sense for us to go with anaerobic biostimulation because we have abundant proof of M&A going on at the site. So a proof of concept pilot test was done, and which was pretty promising, which led us to do the full scale. We procured all the permitting required about 2-3 months before we went into the field, so we have all the documentation we needed. And like I said, the full-scale treatment is in progress, and then hopefully by next year, this time around, we'll have some idea on how successfully it's performing at the site. With that, I'll take any questions you have.
Okay. Any questions from anyone in the room? And we do have some questions. We have at least one question here. More of a comment, your data illustrates the need for long-term monitoring to evaluate the potential for contaminant rebound.
Yes, that's absolutely right. You know, the one of the goals to meet the standards here, like we mentioned, is a sequential treatment, active treatment followed by M&A several times. At least we plan to do 2 or more injections. So we inject first, we wait for, look at what is the M&A rates, and then again make a decision on the second or the third injections. And so although the slide here shows, 4, 8, and 12 months, that's part of the work plan we submitted to the agency, but we intend to continue our monitoring.
Why wasn't a relative increase in DCE observed during monitoring?
Well, actually,
You want to go back to the presentation?
yeah, can I?
Can we go back to the presentation? Let's to close this out. Okay. Now can you go back?
So if I take this particular graph to explain why is CIS not increasing, that's the question. So I think there is CIS, compared to the baseline of minus 5 months, that is 5 months prior to the injection, we do see at least 2-fold increase in the CIS 1,2 DC concentration, which is in the green bars. And then it starts to degrade, and then we do see vinyl chloride accumulation. And in fact, we have a base, when doing the full scale, we have a baseline information on the CSIA, a number like minus 12 delta 13, which means you have cis dechlorination, you have cis DC, which is degrading faster than it can form from TCE. So we got a very good evidence to suggest that TCE is forming, and it is also degrading. At least I hope this particular slide clarifies that question, where we do see increase in the cis DC concentration.
Can we go back to the questions? Will you be using the same tracer compound bromide for the full scale?
Yes. I know you got to realize that the pilot test was done in 2010. So there was some time lag. So we feel that, whatever bromide, residual bromide from the pilot test is there, it's not there around. So we did a baseline sampling for full scale, and we did in fact use bromide. I don't have the numbers for bromide, but yes, we did use the bromide for full scale.
Okay. It looks like that's the end of our questions. Before everybody runs out, especially the people online, please remember online there's an evaluation that you can submit for there, as well as everybody here, as well as signing out. Please fill out the green evaluation form that I mentioned earlier. Okay, thank you all for coming.